Starting from the top, really, founders, CEOs, salespeople run on optimism. It's part of what you need to succeed in those sorts of roles. But for those of us in ops, resilience begins where optimism runs out and collides with reality. So one way of testing how optimism collides with reality is through decision gaming. My first example is something we did with the British Army. So simulating what initially seemed like a routine deployment. Then we introduced one small shock. A key communication specialist, one out of a team of 1,000, suddenly fell ill and was out of action. That firstly looked like a minor hiccup, but the effects spread really quickly. Suddenly, radios were staying silent, convoys stalled, waiting for orders, and the leadership were flying blind. Within hours, the operation ground to a halt, not because the team wasn't capable, but because so much hinged on one individual. Their strength became a fragility. Efficiency made them brittle. A lot of startups face the same dynamics. Sometimes it is a person, but it could just as easily be a process, a supplier, or a customer that you're more reliant on than you realise. One outage, and suddenly your launch slips, your revenue dries up, or your churn rate spikes. Scenario gaming helps you to introduce disruption in a safe space, so you can understand your fragilities and test alternatives before reality forces them on you. So I work for a business called Vedette. So we help leaders facing complex, high-stakes decisions. We create and facilitate scenario-based exercises that help organizations build resilience and make better decisions under pressure. A lot of our work is with defense and government, and I'll talk through a few more of those examples later, but we also support private companies going through change. And the thing that excites me about today is applying all that experience to startups and to scale-ups. The challenges look really different on paper, but actually a lot of the dynamics are exactly the same. Scarce resources, critical dependencies, and constant pressure to adapt. And it's ops leaders, whether that's in the military, in government, or in startups, who most often spot fragilities first and have the responsibility to keep things running when disruption hits. I've got a pretty painful personal experience of this. I founded a live events business that was due to launch in May of 2020. So I've seen firsthand about how vulnerable growing businesses can be to external shocks. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about resilience and how we can go about building it. So how do we actually go about doing this with organizations? The core method that we use is decision gaming. So structured simulations that surface fragility and test your ability as a leadership team, as a company, to adapt and to respond. You start by building a scenario where at the beginning, your team are completely in control. Then you introduce a disruption. Maybe your cloud provider goes down during a customer onboarding push. Maybe a critical supplier fails to deliver. Or maybe new regulation suddenly forces you to change the way that you've been operating. In that moment, the room comes alive. People scramble to adapt and the cracks start to show. Blind spots surface, you challenge each other's assumptions, and you walk away with a much clearer picture of your fragility and what you can do about it. It's a safe to fail environment with no real customers, revenue, or jobs at risk. But when you do it properly, the pressure feels real enough that the learning sticks. So we've run dozens of these for UK Defence, the NHS, NATO, and plenty more. I'll walk you through some of the key lessons that we've learned when it comes to resilience. So the first recurring lesson is that systems that are optimized for efficiency are often the most fragile. So in an army logistics exercise that we ran last year, they planned their supply network perfectly. Then we started playing games. We closed a single bridge. Within hours, soldiers were left vulnerable, short of supplies, and cut off. There was nothing wrong with their original plan in isolation, but you have to remember that the enemy, be that the Russian army, an ambitious competitor, or plain bad luck, always gets the vote. The plan was just too perfect, so efficient that there just wasn't any slack to adapt. And startups face exactly the same trap. Imagine your payment processor freezing accounts on launch day. Suddenly, revenue stops, support teams get overwhelmed, and trust evaporates. Not because your team isn't capable, but because the system is just too lean with no backup plans in place. So what resilience means is deliberately and dynamically balancing efficiency and the extra profit that goes with it with preparedness and slack. Like that really helps achieving strategic ambitions more broadly, rather than just optimizing for efficiency, cutting costs, and trusting to luck that nothing goes wrong. The next point is it's not just about single points of failure. Sometimes every part of the system is working perfectly, exactly as intended, and it still goes wrong. That's because fragility often hides in the connections between systems rather than in the individual systems themselves. So one exercise we did earlier this year for a NATO headquarters, no single unit failed, but the seams between them started to fray. Intelligence was delayed by minutes, and then as that built up, by hours. 2 units moved on different timetables. Supplies were arriving at the wrong place at not quite the right time. Nothing major, nothing catastrophic, just a slow bleed of coordination that snowballed into a bigger problem. By the end of the day, the plan still looked good on paper, but the execution had ground completely to a halt. Not because anyone failed individually, but because the connections between the different units did. Again, just the same way. Marketing can run a great campaign, sales collect the leads, products ship the features, but if the handoffs between those different parts of the organization break down, nothing really works. Leads vanish, launches flop, and customers churn. Fragility hides both inside the silos, but just as much in the gaps between them. And that's a key cornerstone of building resilience. And even when the handoffs work, resilience often comes down to culture. The difference between freezing and adapting under pressure can be whether people feel safe enough to experiment and to speak up when times are tough. This is a particular problem in a lot of the environments we work within, which are really hierarchical in structure, but quite often within startups, you face the same issue. A rockstar CEO, a really impressive founder who people are just unwilling to challenge. An example from earlier this year, when we were working with the police on testing how they might manage disruption in a major live event. Junior officers saw risks building, but stayed quiet and weren't willing to contradict their bosses. Decisions didn't get made, and the incident flared up before it was contained. In other teams, where there was more psychological safety, people spoke up quickly. They tested ideas, they adapted. They had the same plan, the same resources, but completely different outcomes. The difference wasn't training, it wasn't resources, it was culture. And startups face exactly that dynamic too. When people stay silent about a broken process, a botched launch, or an unhappy customer, problems grow and grow until sometimes they explode. But when the culture makes it safe to raise risks and try out fixes, teams adapt and improve faster. Resilience isn't just about systems, plans, and processes. It's not something you can keep in a hallowed corner of your Google Drive. It's how people behave under pressure. So across all of these examples, efficiency, handoffs, culture, the pattern's the same. Fragility often hides in places you don't expect, and you can only see it when the system is under stress. So that is what we're going to explore together now. We're going to run a rapid pre-mortem exercise Pre-mortem exercise, some of you might be familiar with them already. It's one of the simplest types of scenario game, and one we can do a fast forward version of in about 20 minutes, if I've planned it right. It's what happens when you don't wait for the crash. You assume things have already gone wrong, and then look at the wreckage, trace back to try and find the cause. Think about it as running a post-mortem on the future, imagining failure before it happens so you can change the outcome. A pre-mortem lets you fast forward to the point of failure, look around and ask, what got us here? And what could we have done to stop it? Let's talk about now how you can develop your own game within your organization. So the scenario itself is important, but not the be all and end all. Like, the only thing that it's there for is the vehicle to create the conditions where you can expose these hidden fragilities. You can challenge the assumptions in the leadership team, and you can allow people, effectively as training as much as it is learning, to practice a crisis response together. So the good news is you don't need a big complex setup to do it. The game that we just played, I put together in probably about 20 minutes. And you can develop more sophisticated versions of it in a few hours. You can develop high-level insights into some risks that your company faces, or some concrete actions you can take to improve your resilience in a short, sharp, focused session. You don't need a perfect model of the organization. You don't need a huge team. You don't need to spend days in the boardroom sat around a table. Just the right group of people focusing on what a clearly defined problem. So keep it under 2 hours for your first effort. Use a scenario that could really happen, and end up with a quick debrief at the end to capture what surprised you. The goal is not that you all agree that X is our biggest risk or Y is the answer to all these problems. You're not fixing problems on the spot. You're surfacing areas where your resilience needs to grow and some potential ideas for how you might be able to do it. So next is the bit that ops people should love. It's the process, how you go about designing one of these exercises from start to finish. So you start out by defining the purpose of the game. What are you trying to explore or learn? Often this is formulated as a question, something like, how could a key supplier failure impact our business? Or how could we respond if the funding round falls through? All of this is to think about what might happen rather than predicting what will happen. I've said that a couple of times already, but it's really important to note that I'm evangelical about these things, but they're not magic. They will help you explore possible futures rather than settling on what would definitely happen in a particular scenario. Next stage is designing. So build the structure of the game. It can be as simple as 2 little rounds of small group discussions with roles in a particular scenario, like we've done. It can go up to five-day exercises with 70 people, as with some of the things we run for defence. What's really important is to focus exactly on what matters. So try and keep the amount of information that's available to players tight, focused on the things you're looking to explore, and make sure they understand the constraints or the pressures that they would face in that scenario. Next stage is refining. So test the game, maybe run a shorter version of it with a smaller audience, with people who have a bit more time on their hands. You can even do it with AI, just to see the types of answers that you think might come out of it. Adjust the design of the game based on what you've learned from that. If the scenario was too broad, you've come up with too diffuse conclusions and a discussion that isn't really focused. Maybe you want to narrow it down a bit. Maybe the trigger event that you've picked doesn't quite hit the buttons you need it to. So refine all the scenario, that trigger point, the inject, and the roles that you have within the game. So the next run pushes thinking a little bit further. Then deliver it. Run the game with the real decision makers. Observe how people are reacting, what assumptions are coming to the surface, what are the tensions and trade-offs that weren't clear before but are coming out through this pretend crisis. Where are decisions really difficult or stalling? Don't try and fix things as you go along. It's really important to have someone whose role is just there to observe, not get involved, and as neutrally as possible, capture where the problems are. Then lastly, and this is really important, it's the analyze stage. So look back at what you've learned about your company, the system that you've been testing. What are those fragilities? What strengths do you have that you underestimated? This isn't all about finding problems. And if you were to run another game, what might you want to test? So each time you look at this with a slightly different lens, you build a clearer picture on how your organization behaves under stress and where you might want to focus on building resilience next. So that's the simple version of resilience gaming, which can be a really powerful tool in its own right. But you can also make it more rigorous, moving from exploring to real experimentation. So you start by grounding your scenario in real data. So things like real delivery lead times, defect rates, or if you're doing hardware, churn numbers on people or on customers. Bring in experts from finance, people, engineering, logistics to stress test the assumptions you're putting into the game. Make it a bit more scientifically rigorous. That allows you to quantify some of the impacts and outcomes of the game. Not just this would be painful, but this might well cost us £200,000 and delay a launch by up to 6 weeks. Another way to enhance the rigor around the learnings you're getting out of this is repeatability. So running the same scenario with different groups of people representative of the business, or maybe try out 2 different responses side by side just to see when you're simulating this, how much better it holds up. At that point, it's not just an exercise in better understanding your problems. It becomes a much more structured way to test strategy and strengthen decision making, and can play a really big role in stopping very expensive, costly mistakes. Truth is, every startup is fragile. It's not a problem, it's the reality of moving fast on and being resource constrained. I guess the question is whether you discover your weak points in a safe space at the time you choose, or in the midst of a crisis that circumstances forced upon you. Resilience gaming gives you that choice. It won't make your company indestructible, but it will make you faster, sharper, and better prepared when things strain or break. And that's the real kind of heart of resilience. On that point, keen to open it up to you, get some more thoughts on how it went, or answer any questions that you might have on how you can deploy that in your organization.